Hello and welcome back to a new lecture on phonetics. In our previous lecture, we said that given the word diploma, a native speaker would most likely break this word up into syllables as so. Diploma. This type of syllabification is not expected from a native speaker. Given this syllabification, we get this structure here where the P is considered a second onset to the second syllable instead of being given to the coda, which is empty of the first syllable. Since most native speakers agree that this is the correct way to syllabify the word, then there has to be some type of rule that native speakers refer to. A rule that represents syllabification in our minds. Our task in this lecture is to figure out what rules exist for syllabification. The first rule we're going to talk about is the Maximal Onset principle. The Maximal Onset principle is a principle that suggests that consonants that are intervocalic are maximally assigned to the onset. What this basically means is that if you are in doubt where to assign a consonant, then the best suggestion would be to give it to an onset. But this is not without some reservation, so long as they conform with universal and language-specific conditions. Now, before we discuss what these universal and language-specific conditions are, let's first talk about why the maximal onset principle is justified. The maximal onset principle seems to give preference to a CV type syllable. So it gives preference to a syllable that looks like this, a consonant followed by a vowel, instead of a vowel followed by a consonant. What evidence is there that this type of syllable is the more basic, more universal type of syllable? Is there any evidence for it? Well, if you look at the world's languages, it does seem that the CV type of syllable structure is the most basic one. There is some evidence for this. If you look at children all across the world, they start speaking by uttering either ma or b. Later on, they would start with multiple syllables to get mama or baba, regardless of what language the child speaks. So in a sense, this is suggesting that the CV syllable is the more basic type of syllable. Now there are more options available for onsets. What we mean by this is in languages where both onsets and codas are allowed, you can get more variety in the onset. So for example, you might be able to have more than one consonant in the onset, but maybe only one in the coda. You might have a range of different consonants that are allowed in the onset, but not in the coda. And number 3, codas are not very stable. What we mean by this is that in a word like fishing, you are more likely to lose the G than you are to lose the sh sound. So in this case, you would get fishin'. This just shows that the coda is not as basic as the onset. Alright, so now let's go back and see how the maximal onset principle actually works. Let's take the word extra, like so. So now we have two vowels. Draw up the nucleus. Nucleus is part of the rhyme. The rhyme is part of the syllable. Now the rhyme here is going to have a coda, and this syllable is going to need an onset. So first thing, after we assign the nuclei, we assign the onset, starting from here and going backwards. So we're going to give this one consonant, and for this vowel, there is no consonant that precedes it, so there will be no onset. Now the question is, do we start by giving the coda some consonants, or do we continue giving these to the onset? Well, according to the maximal onset principle, we should prefer to give it to the onset. And we will keep doing so like this, and then this will be our final product. But now why is it that the k sound is a coda here? Why did we stop with the S sound? So basically, why didn't we do this? Well, the idea here is that yes, the maximal onset principle does prefer that we give the consonants to the onset, but there are limitations to this. There are rules that even the maximal onset principle must follow. What are these rules? First of all, we have phonotactics. Phonotactics is also called phonotactic constraints. Now these phonotactics are rules that tell you what consonant sequences are allowed. And this is something that is language specific. This is not something that is universal. So every language has its own set of rules. So for English, for example, the longest onset you can have is an onset that is made up of S plus a consonant plus either Y or W or the rotorized R. For example, scream. So as you can see here, our onset is created by 3 different consonants together. But the first one has to be the S sound. No other sound can occur here when you have 3 consecutive consonants in the onset. So that was just one example of the phonotactic constraints in English. And now we understand why we had to stop over here. So again, when we were syllabifying this word, we started off with this syllable. We tried to give as many onsets as possible based on the maximal onset principle, but we had to stop right here because if we move on and give one more, then we will be violating the phonotactic constraint of English, which suggests that the largest onset you may have, again, starts with a S, then must have a consonant, and then, like we said, either Y sound, the W sound, or the R sound.